Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Reveal Report. I'm your host, George Iceman. We thank you for joining us on this Friday night. Get your popcorn, fasten your seatbelts. We are going to dive into a very interesting topic. And by request from yourselves and myself, by popular demand, my next guest, who was here the first time, had nothing but rave reviews from yourselves. The video went viral. A lot of views, one of the highest rated shows we've ever had. A very, very intelligent author. He obviously does much research on many topics, and it's an honor and privilege to have him back. We're going to get into something that I'm interested in, and the topic today will be angels and demons. And you'll hear more about exactly what I'm specifically referring to very, very soon. I want to thank you all for joining us. Please like, subscribe, and share. Remember to give us that thumbs up because it helps in the algorithm. Also, don't forget to comment if there's something you like and you enjoy. Please keep the chat positive and not negative. And for all those that were watching the show last week who may have missed it, the show was called Deals with the Devil. And we did a decode, me and Jesse, on different pop artists and musical performers that have apparently done some type of deal for fame and fortune. And unfortunately, YouTube took that down within 2 hours. I didn't play any music. I felt like there was no copyright really, but they still struck it down. So they're watching everything we do. This is their world and we are just living in it. So we have to abide by their rules, unfortunately. So the show is taken down. And for those that are looking for that show who missed it, it is on my Rumble channel, The Reveal Report. No capitals, no spaces. Just type in The Reveal Report, one word. It'll come up. You can see the show, Deals with the Devil. And it was a very interesting show. I highly recommend it. Tonight, it's going to be very interesting. So without further ado, I'm going to bring out my guest, Mr. Gary Wayne. Gary, how are you?
Doing very well, and thank you for inviting me back to guest on your show. Very much appreciated, and really looking forward to the conversation tonight.
It's going to be absolutely amazing. Our co-host, Jessie Czebotar, is going to be joining us momentarily. She's currently in a different location to make the show, so the audio might not be perfect. There might be some noise in the background. Let me bring her on quickly, see if she could join us briefly here. Jesse, can you hear us loud and clear? Hi, Jesse, you can hear us? Yes? Jesse, can you hear us loud and clear?
Hey, George. Having some issues with hearing, but I'm here.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jesse. So Jesse will be in the background, unfortunately having a little bit of technical difficulties, but nonetheless, it will be an incredible show. So let me begin by saying angels and demons, we're fascinated with it. We've read about it in the Bible. They exist. They don't exist. It's that voice or temptation you get to do things, but then you get the angels that are telling you not to do things, you know. And you see little cartoons back in the late 70s, early 80s. You get a cartoon of a devil on one side and a cartoon of an angel on the other side to give you that, you know, morality boost that you need. Don't do that because this in consequence repercussion. So I'm fascinated with angels and demons. Now, my nature in the occult, 12 years experience, I can tell you many people wish to fast forward the track to success by manifesting things in their lives, whether it be relationships, business, finances, whatever it may be, they turn to the occult. And on that level, you begin to do deals and do things you never thought you'd do. You petition certain beings. They are spiritual, not physical that I can see or touch, but they are physical. And it is, it's evil because there's a price to pay for you to achieve what you wish to achieve. There is a price. I know I paid a price, but I turned to the Lord, God Almighty, to save my life. And I can tell you it's better to be with angels than it is with demons. So, Gary, let's just begin briefly. If you could just tell me, what are the differences between angels and demons? Were they the same, or are they completely different?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and based on where one wants to come from in terms of what their position on that is, it really can make really all the world in difference in terms of the understanding. And can you sort of make things a little bit clearer, or will things be a little bit more fuzzy? Um, and I thought maybe I just sort of interject and sort of play off of what your last show was about, not, and I didn't see the show, but on these bargains. I mean, this whole idea that angels exist and Satan exists is something that we need to grapple with, because the Bible talks a lot about angels and about demons. We need to understand them. And I think it's absolutely scriptural to sort of understand that if you swear oaths in allegiance to Satan, he will collect on that. And I think we need to be very much aware of that kind of power and influence that Satan, as the adversary, has been given over us. So, how do I get there sort of biblically on why I think there might be a contract there, other than all the occult sources that would suggest that there is, and in return they get something while they're in the physical world in their lifetime. We have an instance in the book of Jude where Satan has shown up to claim the body of Moses, and God sends Michael. And what's going on here isn't a fable, it's not an allegory. This is talking about when Moses died and what transpired with that. And so people have always asked me, throughout the number of years I've been doing social media and interviews, is, can you tell me a little bit what that's about? And I won't take too long on it, but it really does go to sort of the veracity of what we're talking about. So we know that Moses was cast into the river, taken in by the royal family of pharaohs, raised in the bloodline. So he would have been initiated from childhood, was educated at Heliopolis, would have sworn oaths to the Pantheon and all the other rituals and things that would have went on, all before God brought him on a mission to save Israel from slavery and lead them to all but into the land of the covenant. For a couple of errors that Moses did, he didn't get there, but he died east of the Jordan River. And what we take from that is that Satan was there because of his due right, that these oaths that God will hold us accountable for, Satan was there for his due diligence in terms of the contract of the oaths that were sworn to him, and he was going to collect Moses for himself. But God is omnipotent. God is greater than the angels, which is, of course, a different view than what polytheists have, because they view God as equal to Satan. And he sent Michael there to veto that contract. So God has the ability to override the contract, but we need to be aware of that. And Moses did extraordinary things on faith for the most part. I mean, he has one encounter on the mountain for sure, and then there's conversations afterwards. But when he was sent back to sent to Egypt, he was working on faith, and I'm not so sure he was 100% comfortable things were going to pan out, but that's a different rabbit hole. So if we understand that there's a veracity to angels and demons in the Bible, then we can start to look at, are they the same or are they different? Are they just sort of different descriptions? And a lot of people use, and very knowledgeable people will say that demons and angels are the same. They're both spirit beings. And I understand that, and it's a good argument, but it really starts to get things sort of muddled in terms of what they do and where they're sort of positioned. There is a hierarchy to the rebellious angels for sure. And that's, we get that from the Hebrew word Saba, which is the host of heaven that we see. The rebellious ones have a host as well. And there's rank and order there, right down to the spurious offspring that live on the earth. It's all part of that hierarchy. So once we sort of understand that, it starts to make sense of Psalms 82 and the Council of the Gods. And in Deuteronomy 32, where God, has the land of the covenant as his own, but the rest of the nations, the people, the 70 nations, both before and after the flood, 70 sons of Adam, even though they're not listed in the book, the 70 patriarchs of Genesis 10, 1 Chronicles, same number as the sons of Jacob, as it describes in Deuteronomy 32, that were born in Egypt. That's the number of nations that are assigned to specific angels. So again, we're starting to see this hierarchy with the council, with the different nations, and you can expect a hierarchy that goes all the way through. So I would suggest that angels are distinct from demons. And I would say that demons are part of the hierarchy. And here's how I get there scripturally. I mean, it would be easy to go to the book of Enoch, but we can just as easily start in the Bible and then say, okay, what does Enoch say on that? And does that fit with the Bible? Because we're going to use that, or at least I'm going to use that as how I measure all things. So we do know that there are spirits, and spirits are from the heavenly realm. The spirits are the angels. They are God. They are the Word of God. They are the Spirit of God. And in the physical realm, you know, angels who are going to physically interact are going to have to take a physical body. And in the physical world, you have a body, a soul, and the spirit will mesh with the soul and be held within the soul and the body, which is like their dwelling place on earth. It's the word oikaterion that shows up in Jude 1:6 for the habitation that the angels left. And in the house of heaven in 2 Corinthians 5:2, only shows up twice, and it means a dwelling place for the spirit. So we know there's a spiritual realm and there's a physical realm. And there's probably several different realms. But we know there's at least one physical realm, and then there's also an underworld realm that seems to be in another dimension as well. And so angels are creations of God, and we're told that God created all of the angels, whether or not it is in the book of Psalms in 104 in the Old Testament, or we get into Colossians and Ephesians in the New Testament. So we know that the Word created all of these for God, just as the Word created all things by God in terms of the physical world. And that he is over top of them, just as God is over top of them, and that Satan is the prince of this world and the God of this world, and we have this hierarchy that we're talking about. So those are spiritual beings that some have the ability to make their own oikaterion on earth, so they can be in the physical realm. At least they did in the past. And we're not sure whether or not they can take that physical realm today, but I think they will, because I think we're going to see them in the end time again, although it may be permitted at that time only to have things fulfilled, but we understand that they can do this. And so the angels are part of this hierarchical organization that would be higher up in the demons, and I'll get to the demons in a second. So you're going to have like the watchers around the throne of God. You're going to have the watchers that are the rebellious ones as well. So the watchers include the archangels that are around the throne and never sleep. They're going to include the cherubim. They're going to include the seraphim, and the ones that are described in book of Ezekiel, chapter 1, chapter 10, the ones that are in the wheels that have one face different than a cherubim, very much cherubim-like. That word wheel that describes the beings as opposed to the actual wheel, which would be Gilgal, but the one that describes the beings is Ophan. And Ophanim is the word that shows up in the book of Enoch for that fourth class of watchers. So so we understand that they're going to be at the apex, and most people sort of look at the seraphim as at the top of the order. And then there's a long-standing doctrine that there are basically 9 sets of these orders of angels, and there's sort of a top tier of the watchers, and then you have a second tier, then you have a third tier. I think there's one more than that, and I talk about it in my book that's coming out, but I don't want to get too far into the minutia. But that's just the hierarchy of the angels, and that includes like the powers, and typically powers is going to go back to dunamis or exousias, and there's two different, the translators aren't always perfectly accurate in terms of the translation, but you have have exousia and powers as powers, and you also have dunamis, and they are different orders. But what it's saying is that there's a different name for each of these kinds of beings within that hierarchy. And Satan is at the apex, and Satan is also called the devil. So the devil is the leader, as he's described, as you take Satan and the devil back to the Greek meaning in Strong's or into the Old Testament. And he's the leader of the fallen angels, just as he leads them in Revelation 12 and is cast down to heaven and is going to be worshipped in the last 3.5 years. But he's also defined as devil, as you take that back, as it's described in Revelation 12 or Revelation 20, as the prince of the demons, as the leader of the demons as well. So they answer directly to him, which now starts to connect back why Moses was having this session when he was dead between Michael and, at least asleep, and Satan over his body because of that oath that was sworn. So who are these demons? Well, these demons are classified as devils in the New Testament. Now, devil, when you're looking at it where it is describing the evil spirits that Jesus is casting out, it goes back to a word called daemon, which is the root word for demon. And it is a bodiless spirit, just like a Rephaim is a bodiless spirit. But we all have spirits, just different types of spirits. And I'll connect that back in a second, back to how it connects into the Rephaim and the Nephilim. But this is a different word than is used to describe Satan as the devil, which is diablos. So what we're seeing is two different kinds of beings.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in terms of how they interact, we see Satan that enters into Judas when Judas is struggling to complete the betrayal of Jesus.
Yes.
So that's that avatara thing that is going on there that we get in the Bible. And we also know demons do something a little bit different, because it's not a symbiotic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And there seems to be a struggle between the two hosts in that oikoterion. And so you have the spirit that is thirsting to rest, like it's in dry places, as Jesus describes these evil spirits and these devil spirits. And they're used interchangeably throughout the four Gospels in describing them. And they're describing the same thing. And that they take over a body, and then you have this war going on. It's not the symbiotic relationship. Now, I also know in the occult, though, that shamans and high-level adepts will bring spirits into them as well.
Correct.
And that there is a bit more of a symbiotic relationship there, but that could be just on the surface. They could be subservient to the spirit that's hosting them. I don't know. I've never been possessed. I don't ever want to be possessed. But there also seems to be something that's sort of halfway between that war that's going on in the body with the demon and one who has been educated well into the black arts, the black sciences, the black knowledge, to be able to maybe perhaps deal with it a little bit better. Or maybe there's certain rituals and words and things that can help control that they're able to do. And then you have the avatara of an angel. And in polytheism, for example, you get Vishnu, who is one of the main gods of Hinduism, who I think he incarnates, 14 to 16 times, somewhere in that zone. And he incarnated into Buddha, for example. But after Buddha was born, right, and added power and wisdom to it. So it's kind of similar to what Satan did. And Shiva also had many, many incarnations as well. So getting back on stream then, is that these are evil spirits that come from somewhere, right? They're not angels. They don't have the same power. And yet they possess, and they do it in a different way than angelic beings do. And they're at the lower level of the hierarchy compared to all the other angels. These are the spurious offspring, which are the Nephilim in the Bible. Right? These are the Rephaim as well, I would think, after the flood as well. And we know that there are these kinds of spirits that are part of the terrible ones on earth, because Ezekiel 32 talks about this to us. And the terrible ones are also mentioned in other parts of the Bible, like Isaiah 14 and Isaiah 25, and it's talking about these giants and this special race. And the ones who were the most terrible and did horrible things and were slain on earth, they go into the sides of the abyss in Ezekiel 32, and they're the ones that are talking to Pharaoh at that time. And so again, they're in prison in the abyss, where the fallen angels are also in the abyss, but they seem to be in separate cells and not in the center of the abyss, as it seems that the angels are in. But that's just sort of my putting together the details on it. But we get this understanding that there are these evil spirits that are different than fallen angels. And we get examples in the Bible of degraded fallen angels with the satyrs, right?
Yeah.
And we get biblical accounts of fallen angels as gods and goddesses. And then we also have verses in the Old Testament where they're worshiping idols, but they're not classified as the devil goat gods.
Yes.
Right? The satyrs.
Yeah.
They are worshiping some sort of lower god that happens afterwards. These are the demigod spirits of the spurious offspring who receive the counterfeit spirit and who require an oikotarian to interact physically in the world and need a place of rest. They're either not, these are the ones that are roaming who are not in the abyss and haven't somehow navigated their way to the underworld successfully, or not permitted there. And so there seems to be, again, from my understanding, a couple sort of different levels. And, you know, being beheaded was the one thing that the Ugaritic texts and other ancient texts said is that this is what they never want to have happen, because they can be killed instantly, just as David took Goliath's head. And so I think that sends them to the abyss as opposed to roaming.
That is absolutely, I actually never heard that before. That's very interesting. So I guess the analogy, the ancient analogy is, if you cut off their heads, that spirit dies with them. Yeah,
because the Rephaim, it has three parts to its meaning. It's rooted in 7495, and that's the word Rapha, and it means doctor, healing, words like that, just as Raphael would mean healer of God, or something to that effect, depending on how you want to translate healing or medicine or whatever. And it's thought that the Rephaim and that probably the Nephilim, even to a higher level, had the ability to self-heal to a certain degree. And so if you didn't kill them suddenly and in a way that they would not be able to repair themselves, then they would recover. Some people think they had sarcophagi, but there's lots of different theories. But it's interesting that that's the root word for Repha or Rephaim, as Genesis 14, Genesis 15 records the Rephaim, and all but 4 times in the Old Testament, in the King James Version, where you see the word giant, it goes back to Rephaim. In Numbers 13:33 twice, and Genesis 6:4 once, it goes back to the word Nephil and Nephilim as the male plural. And then once the King James Version in the book of Job translates Gibborim as the Nephilim were described as a giant as well. So the Rephaim are the post-Diluvian giants in my understanding, and somehow distinct and different because they're called differently, and that they had this ability to repair. And finally, I know I'm taking a long time to get there, but
it's okay.
7496 is also spelt Rapha, and that's the word for Shay. As in Sadee, as in a shade, or as it might be from other language, Sidhe, as in the Shay, or the riders of the Shay, which were again Rephaim, Tuatha Danann, Rephaim, giants after the flood, and probably before as well, and also spirits. and these are the evil spirits. So you get, as you get evil spirit as it's described in the Old Testament or the New Testament, there'll be separate words. So a spirit is, essentially there's two kinds of spirits. There's one that comes from God and there's one that doesn't. And the one that doesn't comes from the fallen angels who procreated and provided them with their spirit that made them immortal in the first period, and had probably all sorts of other traits with that hybridization of an angel and a human female. And that this is why we get in Genesis 6:3 God limiting life to 120 years. It's right in the 4 chapters where Nephilim or 4 verses where Nephilim are created. And it's there for a reason. It's got nothing to do with Noah's commission for 100 years or whatever his commission was. People have written that in to sort of get you away from who the demigods are. It's part of the misinformation. And how do we know it's not a commission of 120 years? Because the math doesn't add up. In Genesis 5, the last chapter, it has Noah in the genealogies and his 3 sons. And then starts in Genesis 6:1 through 4 is the Nephilim narrative. 6:3 is the 120 years. Then you get Noah's commission that seems to start as the result of the violence and the corruption and the destruction and the decaying of all the plant genomes, all the animal DNA, human DNA, with everything that's going on, not only with intermarriage, but also with technology that's being developed. But I don't want to jump down another rabbit hole. I want to sort of wrap this up. And what you get is the time of when Noah first has his first child to the time they go on the ark is 100 years. It's not 120.
Really?
And once you take that back to Hebrew in terms of what the words are there, this is talking about the spirit. And it's that immortal spirit that is passed on. So I know I covered a lot of material. I'll let you guys in here. I'll just end it with what I do have. If people wanted to get a hold of me, and there's no charge for this, just go to my website, genesis6conspiracy.com, the number 6conspiracy.com, and say, can you give me the document on demons? I've got all of that. I've got one on Genesis 6:3 as well. I also have one on how we know the sons of God in Genesis 6 aren't Sethites, and I'm only using biblical scriptures when I'm giving you this. And how do we know the sons of God are angels? I have another one on that. So if people want to cover all of that off, I've got it. Amazing. And also the case for demons.
And I love that. And if you could, again, I will post his website in the description, guys, so you could reach out to him. If he can send me a PDF file or the file, I'll upload it to our Telegram group. We got about 10,000 people there, and we'll share it around with everybody because
I'll send it to you after the show.
Amazing. That's perfect. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is a pretty deep dive, and Gary's the right guy to get into it. This was one particular thing I wanted to touch, angels and demons, and a little bit of that explanation. But another thing that's key that I want to discuss, and I talked to Gary offline about this, if he was able to touch on it. It's kind of mirroring what we talked, is the Nephilim giants. And here is the conspiracy, Gary, that is going around. The not conspiracy is there are powerful people, ladies and gentlemen, that commit magical rituals and make pacts with demon beings, spiritual beings, in order to gain power and to obtain wealth and accomplish things. I've touched this before. Now, here is where it gets a little fishy. And answer this in any way and take your time, Gary. We won't even get into names of who I'm referring to, but are there political personalities that are worshiping these demon gods and getting not just wealth and power, but possibly getting direction on what to do with the future of human beings, the earth, and the world? It's a big one. I know, Gary. It's a big one, but I'm leaving it to you.
Well, it's a great question too. So what I want to start with is that um, I'm not part of polytheism. I've never been part of polytheism. So I can only convey what I've learned over the years and people can see sort of how that matches up. So I think the answer is yes to that. And here's why. I would begin with Adolf Hitler. And he creates an archetype for the end time in terms of the persecution, in terms of being an antichrist figure, in terms of having a Babylon Reichschurch that he starts in 1933, and that he is trying to conquer the entire world. And so everybody is aware of all the horrible things that they did. What they're not aware of is, where did they get the technology from to create things like the rocket, single winged aircraft? Where did they get the technology to design the jet engine? Where did they get the technology to design Tiger and Panzer tanks that they still use that same low profile model even to this day? It was so far ahead. Where did they get the blitzkrieg strategy of war? What Winston Churchill would not permit, and one would presume President Truman at the time as well, what at the trials was their answers to how that came about. What they said was they were communicating with their celestial masters, the Great White Brotherhood, aliens, whatever you want to call them. And they were receiving this knowledge that was advancing their knowledge, and that those demons were helping them all the way through. And it wasn't permitted because they didn't want, as the saying goes, they didn't want the Nazis to be able to then turn around and plead insanity because of it. But it makes sense that they were doing this because they created this Ariosophy, which was the Aryan Grail overlay onto Theosophy, which was a religion created by the Gnostics, designed to be the religion for the end of the world that would unite religion with science, because they come out of the same groups in the 7 sacred sciences, which we don't have time to do today, but makes a good show, and it's in my book. So what they did was they had this whole organizational structure that is going to be created, A, through Ariosophy, and B, through secret societies like the Thule Society, the German Orden Society, many sort of Templar kind of societies, to Teutonic Order types of societies that create the SS, which has all that same sort of Volkish and Vril and Grail ideology that's overlaid on it, was why they used the name Ariosophy for it. And in that, the leaders were able to communicate with these people. Okay, so now let's roll that forward to today, and we see this significant advancement of technology that is unprecedented again. And you get a lot of, whether it's true or not, information that's coming out in terms that they're getting help from celestial white masters, aliens, all sorts of these different beings. And one of them is specifically named Metatron, who is listed in 3rd Enoch, who became an angel and almost Messiah-like, based on the descriptions, and one of the reasons why I don't like 3rd Enoch. But he's called Metatron, and his name was changed to Metatron because of all of the knowledge that he learned, and that was Enoch. And this is Enoch, son of Cain, not Enoch, son of Jared. And remember, for people who overlook it, there's 2 Enochs, and they both had an impact on the antediluvian world, and they both wrote scripture. And so we see this sort of influence today. And we also know that as you dig into the secret societies, I mean, they're just Gnosticism for their religion. They're a polytheist religion. and they're trying to impose global Gnosticism and recreate the new Atlantis in the end time that has 10 Titan Nephilim kings, as Atlantis did, as Plato recorded in Timaeus and Critias. And those are going to be the same number of kings that are listed in Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel not Daniel 8, because it doesn't list 10 there, but has an end time prophecy, Revelation 13 and Revelation 17. And they're trying to create that themselves. Now, the secret societies, after the fall of the Knights Templar, were all given specific agendas. So the Rosicrucians, for example, tend to look after the old religion, the history, alchemy, and things like that, and are very heavily involved in the arts in terms of providing knowledge and things like that. The Illuminati was, and I won't go through all of them, but the Illuminati was created with an agenda to bring about world government and destroy Christianity. Masonry, which is the sort of the entry level to the adept level, and you have all of these degrees that are significantly higher. They were assigned the military, which is why you had so many military people in the Revolutionary War, and just as you still have a lot of them there today, and politics. So you see a lot of Masons at the lower level doing the bidding of the purebloods and the higher up organizations, because everybody has a role. So as an adept, and most of these that would have any significant power, you would think, my speculation, that they would be an adept level or very, very close to it. And many of them are the bloodlines. And if they're the bloodlines, then they're going to be initiated from childhood, and they were an adept before they even got to that level. So you have them who are working through the governments, and then all of these other organizations who are working with the government, and all other organizations, whether or not it's all the economic organizations like the World Bank or organizations like that. They all are following the orders and the guidelines from what comes down from the higher levels of that organization. So at the adept level, they're going to have these rituals, right? And they're going to do that regularly. And not all of them, but most of the rituals, they're trying to communicate with the demons and the fallen angels.
Correct.
So that's why I say the simple answer was yes, but I wanted to give some details how I got there.
Yeah, exactly. So the simple answer, but I wanted you to explain how it gets there. And on that note, the conspiracy that is out there is that this DNA of the giants, the Nephilim of some sort, this DNA, does it possibly exist today in those in the pecking order above all of us? The ones pulling the strings, the ones in power. Do these beings still exist, these Nephilim giants with these demon spirits, or are their spirit living in a human being that is giving orders? It's a very interesting question.
It's a big question too. Yeah. And both is the simple answer. So we know that from what we've talked about, that there's that adept level relationship with a demon, right? And I'm not sure I would say we're seeing fallen angels much in terms of avatar, because of they would have significant more power, and we'd be seeing more things. We understand in the book of Revelations, now that we understand the word demon, and that does not go back to Diablos in Revelations in terms of the demons that come out of the mouth of the false prophet and out of the mouth of the Antichrist that are going to assemble people to war. These are demon spirits, and these are leaders of the world of that time. We also know in Daniel 2, and I think it's verse 42, but it's 38 to 42, where it's talking about the end time empire only within the metallic empires and the 10 toes, where it talks about not mixing with flesh, just as clay and iron doesn't mix with flesh. It talks about the descendants of the metallic empires that are going to mix their seed with humans. It's a very odd passage. I mean, there's two distinct races or things going on here. I tend to think it's probably these are either newly created Rephaim or Nephilim at the time, or it's the purebloods who are going to mix with humankind in a way that we haven't seen. But you can also, as you take that back to Hebrew, you can, and I cover this off in the new book as well. So, because I really go deep on some of this stuff that people are looking for information on, you could interpret that as a spiritual commingling by how it's defined. You could define it either way coming out of the Hebrew words. So I think that tells us that that is going to be at least part of the end time. We also know that the beast kingdoms come from somewhere. And these royal dynasties where they keep their genealogies back into the mists of time, that go back to an Albigen, so to speak, although that's more related to Albion as a giant patriarch. But it's that gens as that single patriarch that they like to take their genealogies back to, and back to a specific angel. Now, there's also going to be some psioning, as I like to create sort of a new word, because you don't usually have an ing on scion, but that means grafting in, and it can also mean sort of one of the offspring of people to inherit a dynasty, and that's grafting in of other bloodlines to ennoble it. So like the Merovingian dynasty or the Stuart dynasty, for example, claim themselves as being the most ennobled bloodlines going back to the Rephaim, Nephilim, and to the fallen angels. So the Rephaim are the ones that are going to be the kings on the earth, and they're going to usurp the kingships very shortly after Babel, just as Nimrod's going to intermarry into those bloodlines in Shinar.
Yes.
And they create the Egyptian dynasty. They create the Babylon dynasty. The Aryans of the Persians take their lineage back. And these are the beast empires that are run by the descendants of the original Rephaim after the flood. And if you're a proponent of Nephilim surviving the flood, then the descendants of the surviving Nephilim after the flood, and their descendants. And here's what we go back biblically on it, and I like to keep this kind of in front of me. Psalm 21:9 through 21:11, and I'm just going to read it because I do have it in front of me. It says, "Thou shalt make them as a fiery oven in the time of thine anger." So we're talking about the end time. "The Lord shall swallow them up in his wrath." So again, we know it's the end time. "And the fire shall devour them." Now, here's where it gets interesting. 21:10, "Their fruit shall thou destroy from the earth, and their seed from among the children of men." Their seed from the children of men, a certain fruit of these people in the end time. "And for they intended evil against thee, and imagined mischievous device which they are not able to perform." So that DNA is with us. And that DNA is what some call that and I write in the first book, is called the gene of Isis. And that's the word that the occult believes is the basis for the name of the book of Genesis, the gene of Isis. And so they really like to use those layered allegories and things in terms of their beliefs. And this is that spark of the divine that they're looking for. So when you hear the New World Order propaganda of 1,000 points of light, that's that spark of the divine. That's that counterfeit spirit. And that's that DNA, the gene of Isis, that they're looking for. And then that starts to make some sense. If they're more concerned with that gene as opposed to the blood, not that the blood isn't important, because it is, but it's the gene that would make the blood. Right? You need the genes to make the blood. So when you're talking about Rh negative, which most of the royals are Rh negative, the Windsors, for example, are O negative, and the most important of the bloodlines. I guess the most pure blood, right? Because it can go with any other blood. You have something odd that's going on because it doesn't seem to be original to humankind and somehow been added. But you can't add something that doesn't have something, and that's where you get into the conundrum of Rh negative. You're missing the D antigen.
Unbelievable.
So how could it be added? Well, it's not added. The blood's not added in. It's the gene that's added in, and the gene makes the type of the blood. So that is a manifestation of that gene of Isis.
Wow.
Right? So it starts to make some sense. And then when you look at, some of the traits that these individuals will have, is absolutely astounding in terms of some of the research. I mean, they have, a lower birth rate than humans do. And we know Rephaim had difficulty in reproducing. And so they had to intermarry with the Canaanites. That's where you get the 9 patriarchless Canaanite tribes from, because they had Rephaim patriarchs, so that they could reproduce. And in the Ugaritic text, they're trying to bring back Baal and Ashtaroth, and they want to create more Rephaim, the Rapiu that are recorded in the Ugaritic text, because they have this fertility issue. So they're going through these fertility rituals. They have higher intelligence. They have more connections to alien encounters and spiritual dimensions. They tend to have more red hair and blonde hair and blue eyes and green eyes. And I won't go through all of it. Again, I have a document on that for people if they want to get a hold of me, just sort of lay out the whole understanding. So I think when we looking for some of that evidence and the genealogies that the royals keep, and understand that's royal, Roy coming from Old French, and Al also has a longer etymology that goes back into Hebrew and into the Middle East. But Ra is king and El is an angel or a god. These are the kings of God, right? Wow. These are the Rex Deus. Again, another term for kings of God. They rule with the divine right to rule on earth as part of the hierarchy given to them from the Baalim, according to, taking it back to Mount Hermon, but from the fallen angels of the post-Diluvian pantheon, to rule as their divine representatives on earth and to head the religions.
Okay. Now, I'll tell you, Gary, you've answered pretty much what I was looking for, and it's incredible stuff. I believe our viewers are going to have to go back and see this a couple of times. I just want a very quick question for you. Specifically, Jesse was wondering, can the Nephilim spirits abide in a human body? Can they possess and live in that human body?
Well, they can, but it's, unless you're an adept, seemingly it's going to be that typical exorcist scenario. Gotcha. Very, very much a war that goes on. Now, if you look at where our technology is going, though, and if you go back to what I said, is they need an oikotarian. They need a dwelling place for their spirit where they're not going to have this war. So I think that's why you have maybe transhumanism, but that may not be free of the original spirit. I think more clone bodies of some sort that will not have a natural spirit, that they could, mesh their spirit in with that soul and its body, give its life, and interact in the end time with that. A lot of people think that they can be in technology as an oikotarian. Some people believe that in some cases, and you get these idols that are speaking in the Old Testament, that they had the ability on certain kinds of idols to actually have an oikotarian in there and speak from the idol. So there seems to be several sort of dwelling places for that spirit to occupy, to interact in the world, but they would like one that is not being opposed.
Two things to touch on quick before we say goodnight and move to Patreon to do a quick Q&A. For those looking to ask a couple of questions in regards to this, please join us on Patreon. The link is in the description. I'll post it here as well. And here's the two questions. One, the exact word you mentioned was like Megatron or Megathon. What was the exact word?
Metatron with a T.
Metatron. Now,
Yeah,
Metatron,
you know how Facebook starts off with meta?
yes.
Yeah, that's the first part of the spelling.
Wow. And that's where it comes from.
Yeah. The metaverse.
This is so like we just say they're doing it in our face now. They're just bluntly pushing it forward. They're not even hiding it now. They're really pushing this agenda forward.
Yes. Yeah, they've always had it in plain sight, but they have gone to whole new levels. They feel no restrictions in terms of talking about what they plan on doing and who they worship. And all of their organizations are going to have some sort of either taciturn or symbolism or words that go back into history and prehistory that's going to tell you that they're an occult organization, because they're that arrogant. Or maybe that's part of the Faustian bargain, so to speak, that they have to do that and they have to tell us what they're going to do. I don't have any proof of that, but that's what they seem to be doing.
In the occultic world, I from what we practice and participate in, it is important with the universal law that we abide by, telling you what we're going to do before we do it. I mean, that's just the law of the law. Who runs that law in the universe? Who polices it? Whether it's the Lord God Almighty. But apparently there is this universal law that even demons must abide by. And if we're going to do their bidding, we must tell you what we're going to do. And it's up to you of your own free will to accept it. Will is key, ladies and gentlemen, in any bargain spiritually that we deal with, especially in the occult world. Of your own free will, you're accepting the consequences and repercussions. You're accepting the deal made and the exchange between you and this spiritual being in order to manifest your desire. It's the fast track. You want to get there? That's the price you pay. And I'll tell you, some people pay a very dear price, don't they, Gary?
They certainly do. And it's not always what they thought it was going to be. But the demons who consider themselves superior, because they come from Nephilim as demigods, they don't care about humans. They were created to destroy us.
Yeah, 100%. Now, here's a cliffhanger, and I'm just going to leave it here. I'm going to ask you one final question. Cliffhanger is, do you believe Revelations or the war of these demons and angels, the Nephilim, coming to earth is close by?
I think it is. And I tend to look at prophecy by putting everything around what Jesus said. And we know he gives us a chronological set of order of events in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 17, Luke 21, because you get this word then that is used, and that's the Greek word tots. That means then, thereafter, when, at that time. So you get these events being laid out, and he also refers to the book of Daniel with the abomination to tell you when the midpoint is, right? Because you get that timing both in Revelations that matches up perfectly with Daniel. So where I'm going with this is that there are not only those signs, but there are overarching signs. There's the beginning of sorrows, which are the birth pangs that tell you about how the catastrophes that increase. That happens in Matthew 24, 8-9. And then later on, and you've got the fig tree generation, followed by the days of Noah. And the fig tree generation is where I want to focus on, is that this is a specific generation that is reserved.
Don't even get into it anymore. The fig tree generation, ladies and gentlemen, the topic of our next discussion. I will bring you back, Gary. I got to bring you. You got to come back. I got to have you back in a couple weeks. The fig tree generation will be the topic. I want to get into it. People want to know. Your research is incredible, and you're very well spoken, and we do appreciate it. For those that are watching, Jessie, I had to step out briefly. She will be joining us for the Q&A after show on Patreon. Please feel free to join us. I want to leave with Laura's comment, which is incredible. Laura Lee says, I do not consent to any of these occultist trickery. I repeat, I do not consent. None of us consent. I second that motion. I want to thank you all for joining us and watching the show. This will continue with a Q&A right after this on Patreon. Join us. The link is in the description. I'll also post Gary's website link. You need to purchase the book. I want to show you guys the book. This book is doing amazing. This book right here, The Genesis Conspiracy, Gary Wayne. It's incredible. So many people have purchased it and bought it. If you hadn't had a chance, a lot of the things he discussed, he touches on it in this book. And Gary, you have another book coming out very shortly. Please go into that briefly.
Yeah, so I said I would never write a sequel to the Genesis 6 conspiracy because I have other books, and I do have one that I'm like 300 pages into, but my communication with people, both on shows and through social media, that I spend probably 3 or 4 hours a day on just answering questions and things. People want to know more what's in the Bible. They want to know more about the angelic hierarchy. They want to know more about the demons. They want to know more about the giants. They want to know how many nations there were and how does it affect prophecy. And one of my things in terms of my approach is that I think you have to understand prehistory to understand prophecy. So if I can get the book out by the fall, which I'm still aiming for, and if I can get the name to be what I want it to be, it's going to be the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, Prehistory and Prophecy.
Wow.
And it really goes deep into levels in terms of that people just haven't seen that's been published out on the market. So I'm on chapter 64 right now. I'm hoping to close out between 75 and 80, and I promise it'll be a little bit shorter than the first book.
I think they love it anyway, Gary. I think no matter how big it is, they're going to pick it up. But I'm excited for it. Hey, did you ever think about doing an audio of it where people could listen to you actually say it and speak the words?
Well, if it's going to get done, it'll be me that would do it.
Yes.
So many groups have looked at the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, the first book, to do it. They tend to back away because of the size of the project and the cost and the expected returns. Other people have set into it and then stopped, and there's always a common denominator. In fact, there was one group that did it last year, and I got an email from them because I was told it was done, and that about 2 or 3 months ago, is that it's just gone. It just was wiped off their computer files, and they suffered 2 years of constant spiritual attacks, and that's typically what happens when somebody takes on the project. So the only way to do it is I would need to do it, and I really don't have the time. I wish I did.
Well, when you do, Gary, I'm telling you, these audio things, because a lot of people sometimes, and some that are my viewers watching the show, they're working out, they're running errands, they're in their car. And while they're doing their daily chores, they would love to hear your voice go into the book. So again, when you have the time, it's another option for everybody. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
Gary, let's close off with, if you don't mind, I don't know if you're willing to. If you don't, I can do it. But are you willing to say a prayer, a blessing over everybody watching the show today?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
Father in heaven, we thank you for providing the opportunity to be able to communicate in, yes, a modern way, and in a way where we're communicating with people that are from diverse places in a time where we need to have communication in diverse places and to learn and understand what is going on in this world today and how we can communicate to people what we see and what we think is taking place, and lead them back to you and back to Scripture so that they can better prepare themselves and we can better prepare ourselves for the challenges that we have. So, Father in heaven, we thank you for permitting this and blessing us and blessing all the people that are, and to bless all of the people that are out there tonight, and that they can take what we've talked about and what they want to use and start communicating that in a way that's going to plant more seeds out there for people, whereas things start to become more obvious, that they begin to start back to you. So we thank you for all of this. We thank you for being with us. We pray that you help us do things on earth as they are in heaven. And we pray these things in the name of our Redeemer, the Word Jesus, who sits at your right-hand side and testifies to you for us and for all of the saints. And we also pray in the name of the Holy Spirit, in your great and holy name.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Guys, thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, share this far and wide, or join us on Patreon. Coming up next, me and Gary, Jesse will be joining us as well for an amazing Q&A. And I'll actually, reach out to Gary because his schedule is busy, and I'll give him a date. He'll let me know when he's available to bring him back as we talk about this generation. We're getting into that fig generation. I want to talk about that. It's so key as we get into these prophecies, this battle on earth that's coming. We're going to dive deep. Again, thank you for watching. Get outside, raise your vibration, smile, laugh, enjoy yourselves, guys. Don't let the media lower your energy. Raise your energy and get outside and get that vitamin D. And most importantly, give glory, grace, and praise to God Almighty. Thank you for watching. We'll see you at Patreon, or we'll see you next week. Good night, everyone.